Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today, jumping back into part 2 of Keys to the Kingdom, the 4th book in Vallow-Daybell Standing in Holy Places series. So without further ado, I just want to say a wonderful thank you to my patrons and my channel members. And I thank you all for joining me each and every week. And with that, I'm going to say if you'd like to join them, those links are down below. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. Really helps the channel. And with that, I'm going to jump right back into the story. If you remember last time, we ended with pioneers going out and revitalizing towns and cities around New Jerusalem in North America, and they, revitalized them. If you could find your old house and no one was in it, you could have it. We talked about how they still celebrated Thanksgiving, how they sent frozen turkeys to all of them, and how Butterball must have survived the apocalypse. And that at Christmas, instead of having the commercialism of Christmas, the fun Santa Claus stuff, they decided to keep it religious festivals, talking about Mormon religion. And then we go over to Israel, where Josh and Colton walked the path that Jesus walked during his crucifixion and resurrection. So there's an Easter Christmas crossover. Could be an interesting special. I don't know. Vallow-Daybell's Christmas Easter crossover special. Couldn't be any worse than the Star Wars Christmas special. But anyway. So now we cut to Moscow and the Kremlin and a meeting of the coalition leaders. Meanwhile, Miko has kind of ingratiated himself into Putin's, or whoever this Russian leader is, his graces, and is now kind of a first assistant to him. So he's kind of a scribe, so he attends all these meetings, and because he can miraculously understand all these languages, he's able to hear all this stuff, because I guess they don't have the little headphones that automatically translate like they do at the UN. I guess that technology's gone, but whatever. So anyway, he's able to understand what's being said. And the Russian leader makes this speech and then says, "We have a special guest. Elias of Syria walks his happy butt up to the podium, and Miko immediately says, what's he doing here? He's a reality show star." But anyway, Elias introduces himself and says, "I am Elias of Syria. I come to you as a brother and a friend. I'm grateful that you want to listen to me. I've spent many weeks in Jerusalem conversing with their leaders and to try to anticipate what their true intentions are. They are united and confident that their God will protect them." And then he reminded them of all the times Israel had overcome the odds, everything from biblical history to the war, the very short-lived, like 7 days war that happened when Israel became a country, and that they're confident that they will withstand whatever the coalition throws at them. And then he says, "Two men have arrived from the United States, and I sense that they could be a threat not only to you, but to me and Syria, my home country, which is right next door. And they may even be, since they're from America, they may even be a threat to the coalition's global plans." So Elias, the great peaceful leader that wanted to be in peace to the world, says the only thing they can do is eliminate Israel and then eliminate the United States, because those are the two things that stand in the way of them having world peace. And he said, "I'm sure if we can launch a deadly attack at Jerusalem and Israel, that any survivors would join us, and the same with the United States. Once we reinvade with a reinvigorated army and kill a few million of them, they'll surrender, and we'll just be able to have whatever kind of world we want, which is everything united under China, Russia, and the Middle Eastern countries." So, a huge applause break. Miko goes cold. And he's just sitting there thinking, my God, I got to warn the Mormons in New Jerusalem. But then there's a dinner break. I guess they have dinner breaks. And while there, Miko eats his dinner and then kind of walks out in the courtyard and listens to all the conversations going on around him about people excited about attacking Israel and that this is going to happen sooner than later. And then he kind of feels a cold chill go up his back. And he looks up and sees on the horizon this bluish, blackish cloud that seems to be almost alive. It's kind of rolling and poling and milling about, coming right toward him. And then it's audibly as if he could have heard the people next to him speak, and he hears what he considers an angelic voice saying, go to your room, close up all the openings, and stay there until we tell you to come out. He literally heard that. In some places, that's called schizophrenia. But he heard them, and he decided not to argue. He just excuses himself and goes immediately back to his room in the Kremlin. He closes the door. He takes pillowcases, whatever he has, and he stuffs up all the holes, locks his windows, makes sure every crevice and crack are covered, and waits. He's able to see through the glass panes of his window that this cloud is coming ever closer, 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 and he realizes it's swarms and swarms of large horseflies. And they are swarming off over everything, animal, human, everything. They're eating vegetation. They're biting people. He hears people running up and down the halls as they start to get inside the Kremlin, banging on doors, asking to be let in, that they're being bitten to death. But he remembers what whoever that angel was told him, don't open your doors. So he kind of curls up in the fetal position in his bed and listens. And then while he's laying there, he kind of sees his Bible and his Book of Mormon that, he keeps safely hidden away. He kind of feels the urge to open it. He opens the Bible up to the book of Revelation and reads about the first of 7 plagues that God promises to visit upon the earth. The cups that were poured out, the first trump and the first cup of suffering poured out. This is the first one, folks. Swarms of horseflies. And so it basically decimates Kremlin, it decimates all of Russia, and then the swarms continue across all of the Middle East into Eastern Europe and causing a whole lot of damage. The next day, Miko is told that he can leave his room. He goes out. There's dead animals, dead people, suffering people laying everywhere. He makes it to the Russian leader's room, and he realizes the Russian leader has been bitten half to death and realizes that these strange pustules are swelling up on everyone's body, that whatever these horseflies not only bit people to death and animals to death, they also carried some kind of unknown disease, and there were lots of sick people. And these, according to radar reports, these same swarms had gone across most of Asia and were now into the Middle East, heading into Europe. We cut to New Jerusalem, where Colton and Josh, because they're the 2 judges, are able to use their magical heaven powers to protect the people of Jerusalem from them. And finally, the swarms go all across Europe, and the swarms eventually die out at the Atlantic Ocean. And they confirm that as John the Revelator just walks his happy butt back up in there and tells them that, yes, this was the first plague of Revelation, and that they destroyed a large part of wicked people. All the people that died were wicked, including the Russian president succumbs to the disease and dies. So I guess Putin is evil. Could be. Most dictators that do mass genocide against their own people are evil. And basically, the swarms did die out at the Atlantic, so they did not reach North America or the Western Hemisphere. Evidently, they were spared. Then we cut back to Springville, where Jonas Ferguson, remember him? He, had helped Mathoni with several of his missions, worked at the recycling plant, was the one that, was originally supposed to be a plant to destroy the Mormons of Manti. Well, he's come to Springville to help, and he meets up with his old friend Doug, and they have a great reunion. He's happy to see Daniel, because remember, it was baby Daniel, him having to hold him that night, that caused him to confess what he was really there for and not hurt the Daltons. He's been sent to Springville to start a recycling program. You know, I'm not against recycling or anything green, anything that I'm not against that. But it just seems ill placed in this. I don't know. But anyway, so he has dinner with the Daltons and they asked him to stay over. So we cut to later that night. Y'all, this is the most terrible part of this whole book. Cut to that night when Becky wakes up with a bad feeling and she goes to check on little Daniel, little 3-year-old Daniel, and finds him in respiratory distress. He was blue. She yelled for Doug. Doug came running, and instead of giving that kid CPR, he tries to perform a blessing on him. Nothing happens. They don't call anybody. They don't try to do any kind of CPR. They just try to bless the child. And the child isn't responding. Doug looks into his son's eyes and simply tells him, "You can go home, Daniel. I give you permission." And then the baby dies. What did I just read? Doug looks at Becky and says, "I'm sorry. The Lord didn't want him to be healed. He wanted him to return home. He has a mission. Remember when our former president said that he wasn't long for this world? I'm sorry." Very comforting, Doug. And so the very next day, they started digging his grave. Boy, Chad likes to dig some graves. Jonas was helping him, and Jonas burst into tears. And he said, "It was this little guy that put me on the straight and narrow. I need to do something for him. Will you let me make his coffin?" So, of course, Doug says yes, and they removed a kitchen cabinet from one of the nearby houses and repurposed that to be a coffin for the little 3-year-old guy. They shoved him in a kitchen cabinet, y'all. So they buried him. They had his service. Meanwhile, cut to Daniel. Daniel's watching all this from the veil. 3-year-old baby angel up there watching it from the veil. And he said he's going to miss his family. He's sorry he only had 3 years, but he learned a lot. And now he has been tapped to help prepare for Jesus' second coming. And now he has a fully formed arms and legs, and he's completely healed. And he was going to be very instrumental in helping to bring about Jesus' second coming, like a campaign manager. Meanwhile, we fast forward couple of months, and I guess, they've gotten over it. And basically, Doug and his friend Jason and another man named Tom, as well as Jonas, have been charged with going and investigating reports of packs, literally, that's what he says, packs of teenagers that live in nearby Lincoln Park. I guess it was a suburb of Springville or a town near Springville. It's behind the Walmart. That's what they said. And there's been reports of kids, tribes or packs of kids roaming around there, generally making a nuisance of themselves. It's the apocalypse. But, so I guess this is like Children of the Corn. I guess they're going to like Gatlin. But anyway, so a couple of days later, they all go down to the Walmart and they kind of start investigating. And then they spot a group of teenage boys and girls milling around in the mountain range behind the hills behind Walmart. And they call to them. And they do come down and they offer them food, which they take. And then the kids realize it's safe and bring out, about 100 kids that have been living in that general area. Tom recognized one of the kids. Darren, how are you doing? Come help pass out this food. Now, Chad makes a big deal about how they couldn't tell boys from girls because they all had long hair, except for the little bit of scruff on the boys' chins. You couldn't tell girls from boys. Darren, I guess who was a neighbor of his, who was a runaway, said that there had been 800 of them, and about 600 had died during the winter, so now there was only about 200 left. And then they tell a very bone-chilling story how when they first kind of went into this subdivision that's around Walmart, there were adults there, and they kind of, commingled in with the adults. These were a bunch of teenagers and young adults from nearby cities and towns, and they converged on this subdivision. And for a time, there was harmony living with the families that were already there. And then the kids realized they didn't want to take orders from the adults. So there was literally a war between adults and children, and the children won. So this is literally Children of the Corn. Literally. And so there's a couple of girls and boys that ask if they can go back to Springville with these people, that they don't want to live out here anymore. Most of the kids decide they want to stay, but they just want to keep to themselves, continue doing what they're doing. So they say, sure, you can go back to Springville with us. I don't know about you, but I ain't doing that. I'm all for charity, but that's exactly the scenario that happened in Children of the Corn Part 2. These adults came and rescued the leftover kids from Gatlin, took them to another neighboring town, and then there's a house gets dropped on somebody, and then the corn sprouts up, and then most of those adults end up dead. I ain't doing that. I'll come back every so often, drop some food, but you staying out of my town. Isaac, Malachi, and all of you. But anyway, they took some of the kids back to Springville with them. And some of the kids left Lincoln Park and branched out and went to some of the other towns and cities around to ingratiate again. And then about 70 of the kids went back to Springville, where they were housed with adults. And some of them had been Mormons that were runaways or just got scared when everything went down and took off for the hills. And then one boy told his family he was living with how he hid during the battle, didn't want to be a part of it, and he felt like a coward and he hated killing. That's just what I'd say if I was the Children of the Corn, too. Just saying. I'd say I was anti-violence, too. Then I spring it on you. Doug and Becky took a little girl named Tara into their house, and she said she had been a Mormon, and they start talking to her about New Jerusalem and Zion, and she said she remembered her parents talking about how that would be a thing. They showed her New Zion on Zoom, and because she had ran away from her parents when all the trouble started, she didn't know what happened to her parents. Well, guess what? On the Zoom thing, she sees her parents. Hallelujah. And so they send her back to New Jerusalem to be reunited with her parents. Happy days. Meanwhile, Tad and Emma are missing. They're still just outside New Jerusalem. They are missing their son, David, who has been away for a couple of years working with the 12 tribe, the lost 10 tribes, the Siberian Mormons that are now living, several hundred miles outside the city. And he's returning home just in time for April 6th, which is a Restoration Day holiday in New Jerusalem. So he's returning by train. Evidently, they've got high-speed rail. And he's returning by train, and he sees his parents and Phyllis waiting for him. So he sees his parents, he immediately hugs and kisses Phyllis, and they spend this entire holiday together. And basically, he proposes to Phyllis, and Phyllis says yes. Saw that coming. Meanwhile, we cut to Josh's wife, Kim, who's having a hard time of it. She misses Josh terribly. And she couldn't even go to her nephew Daniel's funeral in Utah, so she was lonely and scared. But she was able to have a Zoom chat with her parents, who are somewhere in Peru helping with cities down there. And they told her that they had heard from her sister Tina, and that Tina may be coming to visit her. And I said, oh, cool, getting to meet another character. Only Tina's dead. So this is a beyond the veil kind of visit. So that night, when she puts the twins to bed and she lays down, she starts to feel strange. And then she basically has an out-of-body experience, goes up to the veil, and has this whole tour of heaven where her sister Tina tells Kim that she is Mormon royalty, descended from, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, or what they listed off a whole lot of genealogy. I'm sure it wasn't Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. I'm just throwing that in there, but she's royalty. and that she is taken on a tour of heaven, gets to see Daniel, and gets to see all the good work he's doing, and is basically teleported back into her body. That was 2 chapters, y'all. Yeah. But she didn't get out of that without being given some heavenly data entry work. Basically, her mission is to take a list of 30,000 names on celestial paper and enter them into the database of the Mormon Church. These are living and dead people. She is to enter all of these herself. 30,000, enter all their information. And so that's her assignment. That's her great assignment to help Jesus return. Data entry. So we cut back to Moscow and the Kremlin, where Miko is dressed in coveralls and gas mask and gloves, and he's helping people move all the dead bodies and bury all the dead bodies, including the Russian president. And they bury them out in this mass grave, pretty much, where he said that some of Stalin's victims were buried. I don't know. But anyway, that's the gruesome. We have to get a gruesome description of every gravesite from Chad Daybell. It's just expected. But anyway, so after all that's said and done, they cleaned up the city. Elias is offered to be the new leader of the coalition because, of course, that just happens. He comes in and makes one speech. Now he's the grand leader. The Chinese leader, the Iranian leader. None of them want it. Let's give it to Elias. But anyway, so Elias meets with Miko and says that the Russian president had a whole lot of trust in him, and he wanted him for his cabinet, so he made him his top aide. And then he goes and makes a speech to the coalition where he accepts the leadership and talks about how their main objective would still be world peace, even if they had to eliminate Israel and the United States to do it. But even though there would be world war after it was all over, they would have a utopian society. And they all clap. And then he returns to his chambers, and guess who we see? Satan. Satan appears to Elias, so our suspicion about him being the Antichrist are absolutely true. And Satan congratulates him on his speech and doing so well. He says, "You were by far the best choice for this job to lead the whole world and bring about my plan for the whole world." And then Satan takes all the credit for putting him here because he recognized him as a young kid and had all the control over his life. And then he told him, though, he needed to take out Jerusalem and Israel as quickly as possible and to kill the 2 Americans, i.e. Josh and Colton, that were there. And then he told him that they had the Mormons to deal with because the Mormons have developed quite a society in North America, and that Miko was a spy. And he needed to eliminate Miko and use Miko as a pawn, as an LDS informant, and frame him for an attack on Jerusalem. So basically he's telling Elias he needs to launch a secret attack on Israel. He tells him that he has people in Libya that will send a couple of missiles, just shoot a couple of missiles right over at Israel and take out the Dome of the Rock, which will piss off every Muslim, according to Satan. And that he was to frame Miko for it, saying that Miko had it done because this was all Mormon shenanigans. And even though Elias is a little nervous, he agrees. So Elias sends some kind of electronic communication to just these 2 assassins or whatever for hire in Libya, and they fire two missiles into Jerusalem at the Dome of the Rock and completely destroy the Muslim mosque. Meanwhile, Colton and Josh are able to use their force powers to lift rocks off of people and rescue people and dig the bodies out and try to make heads or tails of it. And by doing this, they demonstrate their power to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people begin to see them as something sent from God to protect them. So in a way, it kind of ingratiated themselves. But meanwhile, no one knows where this missile is coming from. No radar exists that could track this thing coming from Libya. No one tracked this thing coming from Africa at all. So immediately, all of the Muslim people in Jerusalem and Israel take it as a personal attack against them and decide that it's probably the Jewish people, since they originally wanted to take down the Dome of the Rock so they could build up their temple again. Take it that that's what's happened, and all the Muslims in Israel take it as a threat, and they leave. They literally leave Israel. A lot of them go to Syria. They go into Egypt. They go into other countries. Just get out of Israel, because the Jewish people are after us. The Jewish and the Christians, they don't want any more to do with us. They're out of it, and no one tracks these missiles at all. Meanwhile, we cut back to the Kremlin, and we've got Elias talking to other coalition leaders in a super secret meeting that they have destroyed the Dome of the Rock, and that he has determined, through whatever power he has, that it was the Jews, and the Jews have destroyed the most sacred Islamic mosque in the world. And of course, the Muslim leaders are really upset, and they want to immediately launch an attack against Israel. He says, we can't right now. We have to let our Muslim brother and sisters get out. Many of them have gone to Syria. They've gone to other countries. But do not worry, brothers and sisters. We will get revenge for what has just happened. And so basically he ignites the coalition against Israel. He also promises them that they will not destroy Jerusalem, as it's a holy city for many religions, that they will do this in the most, undamaging way they can possibly conquer a country. And then he says, we will do this, and he adjourns the meeting. Meanwhile, cut back to Jerusalem, where Ben Cohen is talking to Josh and Colton, and is telling them that the Jewish leaders of Israel have denied 100% responsibility for what just happened, that they did not do it. They don't know where the missiles came from. That was not something they were planning to do. And they did not do it. But no one seems to be believing them. So then, in another unneeded cutaway, we cut back to the Kremlin. And then we cut to Elias knocking on Miko's room door. He enters, they have a conversation, and then Elias just asks him point blank, are you a Christian? More importantly, are you a Mormon? And Elias says, I need to know, yes or no. Don't lie to me. Miko stays quiet for about 10 seconds and realizes, yes, as long as there is a Jesus, I will worship him. And Elias screams, wrong answer, grabs Miko by his hair, slams his head into the wall, puts a knee into Miko's chest, slaps him hard against the face, and then says, deny Jesus or die. And Miko says, no, not going to happen. So Elias throws him against the wall, pulls out a concealed knife, and stabs Miko in the chest. And then twists it in. Miko slides to the floor dead, and immediately his spirit leaves his body. He rises above his body, and then turns around and is able to see his now dead body leaning against the wall. He immediately watches what Elias does. Elias makes sure he's dead, and then Elias walks over to his desk and puts a partially written letter, on his desk with an envelope addressed to Ben Cohen in Jerusalem, and then heads out the door, and he can hear him making a ruckus as he goes down the hallway. So Miko goes over, picks up the letter, and reads it, because I guess, whatever he is, a transcended being can pick up letters. And so he basically reads it, and it's basically a letter telling the Jews in Jerusalem, congratulations on destroying the Dome of the Rock. We can now begin rebuilding our own temple, and the Latter-day Saints are behind you. We're all in this together. Your brother, Miko Petrov. So basically, Elias is framing Miko and the Mormons and the Jews for the missile attack. And he goes, this is a horrible lie. What's his end game? And about that time, Elias came running back in with a couple of guards. He hears him tell the guards, "This happened. I didn't mean for it to happen. I came to visit Miko to talk some strategy with him. He was writing a letter when I entered his room. He rather frantically tried to hide it. I asked to see it. He wouldn't. He wouldn't give it to me, and then we got into a struggle, and he attacked me. I thought he was going to kill me, so I had to defend myself." And the guard says, "Yeah, that's understandable." So they read the letter, and of course the guards get really infuriated, and Elias says, "Call an emergency meeting of the coalition leaders. We've been infiltrated by traitors." So Elias tells the guards to get rid of his body immediately. The guards take his body out. Miko follows to see what they're going to do. And they take him to a mass grave where evidently they bury people that have been killed for the good of the coalition. And he sees other spirits that have been killed, innocent spirits that have been killed, hovering around. And he watches as they bury his body directly in the dirt. And then he basically realizes he has to get to Jerusalem and warn Josh and Colton what just happened. So he teleports to Jerusalem. But not before he makes a pit stop back in the Kremlin to see what Elias is up to. And Elias has adjourned a meeting of the highest placed officers in the coalition and is telling them exactly what just happened, that the Jews and the Mormons are responsible for the destruction of the Dome of the Rock, and that immediately they need to raise an army of 100,000 men, which will be transported to Syria within the next 48 hours, and they will prepare an all-out assault against Jerusalem that he would personally supervise. He said, "Within a week, we will triumphantly be standing on the Temple Mount, and we will rebuild the Dome of the Rock bigger than better than it ever happened." And it was at that time that Miko realized he had to warn his people, so he teleports onto Israel and has a conversation with Josh, Ben, and Colton, and lets them know that they've been framed for the destruction of the Dome of the Rock, and that there is a 100,000 strong coalition army heading toward Israel within the next 48 hours. Meanwhile, Satan is watching all of this with glee. And Satan starts having giving a monologue here. He's basically talking about how Elias has surpassed his wildest dreams and how well he would do. He said, of all the antichrists he has trained, that Elias had the most skill. He is the actual antichrist, the son of Satan, that will basically rule the world for Satan, and that he could not have been prouder, that he's trained a lot of men and women in his life to elevate to this level, but none of them ever made the mark. And he mentioned Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, and Mao, and saying that all of them took the blood oath to give their soul to him willingly, but could not live up. He said Elias was almost gleeful, whereas the others were kind of hesitant. Elias was almost gleeful about basically selling his soul to Satan for the power and to finally make the world a peaceful place. So his quest for peace is what led him here. So he says, Satan says he's making him proud, like a proud father to a proud son. He says when he stabbed Miko, he had the same glee as when Cain stabbed Abel. Meanwhile, after Miko has visited and told our friends in Jerusalem what's happening, he goes into the veil. So he's gone. His spirit is gone. And basically, Ben, Josh, and Colton start to rally the Israeli army. They start to ask for volunteers, and they build a huge volunteer army to protect Jerusalem and to protect Israel. Their scouts are out watching, and they report that the coalition army has crossed the Syrian border this morning. They're making good speed on the highway. They're already near Nazareth. They're going to be here by this afternoon. Now, Nazareth is about 65 miles from Jerusalem, and they realize this is a little too close for comfort, so it's time for a little force magic to slow down Elias's army of 100,000 just a little bit. So Josh and Colton use their force magic to generate an F5 tornado, which they send directly at Elias's army. And this tornado literally attacks Elias's army. It's sucking troops in, destroying their jeeps, knocking stuff over. It even, according to Israeli scouts, it even chases some of the, literally like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, it chases some of the coalition armies up the interstate, tearing up everything, tanks, people, whatever. And then it just dissipates. After it does its damage, it just dissipates. So Elias got caught in like the first round of it. His Jeep was flipped upside down, so he digs him, and his driver was killed. So he digs himself out of the sand and looks around. So he digs himself out, realizes he's been injured. He's got an injury on his left hand that's bleeding. And he realizes that a lot of his troops and equipment have been lost. He rallies his officers and tells them to, let's regroup, see what happened, see what we're missing. And it turns out that about half their equipment was destroyed and 20,000 out of the 100,000 troops are dead or missing. So they retreated into Syria to regroup, and basically just in time for the second plague of Revelation to hit. Basically, a strange foreign metal is released from the depths of the earth, which turns all water supply in Europe, Asia, Middle East, everywhere, into blood red. So this is the plague where it talks about all the bodies of water turning into blood. It's just this strange, red metallic thing that invades all the water, salt water and fresh water, and immediately kills all of the plankton, all the fish, all the sea life. And Elias realizes this is going to be a huge ecological disaster, so he is airlifted back to the Kremlin to confer with coalition scientists about what's going on, also to execute his meteorologists because they didn't predict this tornado. The meteorologist tells him there was no storm front. That tornado came out of nowhere, and that's where he realized it must have been the apostles in Jerusalem that conjured up this that tornado, and possibly whatever was happening was also their doing. He realized how angry Satan's going to be with him because Satan wanted Israel destroyed that day. But he goes on their satellite network and tries to give the people of the world a pep talk. He said that they would come through this. They didn't know exactly what was causing it, but his scientists were working on a way to clean it up. But he knew in his heart of hearts that millions would die because this was going to kill animals, crops, and there would be a massive food shortage. Meanwhile, the prophet is told by John the Revelator that it's the second plague, and this one will come to America, that North America and the Western Hemisphere would not be protected from this plague. So he goes on and gives a huge speech to the saints in North America, Central America, and South America that they need to start storing up fresh water, food, bring their animals inside, whatever they can do to avoid coming in contact with this dirty water. And that he fears the next plague will start immediately after this plague, which is prophesied to be scorching heat. And so the saints of North America, South America, Central America do exactly as they're told. They store up water, they store up food, they take care of their animals, they take care of each other, and they make it through. Meanwhile, over in Europe and Asia, there's riots, there's food shortages, there's people killing each other over the least little bit of food. And basically, Elias knows he has to keep spirits high. He has to tame this chaos that's around him. So he goes on a satellite broadcast and says that he will save them all. And he literally takes some red water that he has. He's going to play a prank on them. He actually takes water that has been colored with food coloring and pours it through a carbon filter, which filters all the water out. He makes them think he has turned the red water back to clear, and that the waters on Earth would turn normal again. Somehow, miraculously, it's about this time that this plague ends, and whatever that strange mineral was resettles back into the earth, and within a week or two, all the water is its normal color again. And as a result, people associate what Elias did as a prank on television as he actually saved them. So he becomes the talk of the globe, just like he once was as a reality show star, and they realize that he should be their leader, and he becomes the de facto leader of the world. In fact, a Chinese television commentator started referring to him by the name Gog. And that name caught on, and the whole world called him Gog. And we're just in time for that third plague. And I'm going to end part 2 of Keys to the Kingdom right here. I will be back tomorrow with the third and final part of this book, and I will see you very soon. Until next time, Keto and Cry.